What happens when survival demands you marry your enemy? When freedom becomes a cage with a wedding ring? This isn't a love story that starts with hope. It starts with a gun to your head and a choice between two kinds of death. Stay with me until the end, because what you think you know about this story, you're wrong. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and whether you could ever forgive someone who destroyed your entire world. Arizona Territory, 1878. The wagon train burned behind Elena Cortez as she stood in the desert dust, her hands bound with rope, watching everything she owned turn to ash and smoke. 20 years old, dark hair matted with blood from a gash above her eye, dress torn at the shoulder, and 3 Apache warriors on horseback circling her like wolves deciding whether she was worth the trouble. Her father's trading caravan had been ambushed at dawn. 17 people dead in less than 10 minutes. Elena had survived only because she'd been fetching water from the creek when the attack began. She'd run. They'd caught her within a quarter mile. Now she stood alone in the wasteland, the only living thing for miles except for the men who'd just slaughtered everyone she knew. The leader dismounted, tall, lean, maybe 25, with obsidian eyes that revealed nothing. He circled her slowly, studying her like livestock at auction. "Please," Elena whispered in broken Spanish, the only language besides English she knew. "I have nothing. Take what you want and let me go." He replied in perfect, unaccented English. "You think I want your belongings?" The shock must have shown on her face because something almost like amusement flickered across his features. "My name is Shadowhawk," he said, "and you just became very valuable to me. But not in the way you think." Elena's stomach dropped. She'd heard the stories, the things that happened to captive women. Shadowhawk seemed to read her thoughts. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to marry you." The statement was so absurd that Elena almost laughed, until she saw the cold calculation in his eyes. This wasn't desire. This was strategy. "My tribe needs leverage with the American garrison at Fort Verde," he explained flatly. "The commander there is a man named Colonel Brennan. His nephew, a spoiled drunk named Marcus, was supposed to marry you 3 months from now. The engagement was announced in the Santa Fe newspapers." Elena's blood turned to ice. "How do you know that?" "Because we've been watching your father's caravan for weeks, waiting for exactly this opportunity." Shadowhawk's voice held no emotion whatsoever. "Marcus Brennan is the colonel's only remaining family. The engagement made you valuable. Your death in this attack would devastate him. But your survival as my wife, that makes you a bargaining chip." "I don't understand." "You will." He cut the ropes binding her wrists, then grabbed her arm and pulled her toward his horse. "The garrison has been pushing into our hunting grounds, building outposts on sacred land. They ignore every treaty, every boundary. But they will negotiate for you, or more precisely, for Marcus Brennan's pride. No man wants his bride marrying an Apache warrior. The humiliation alone will force Brennan's hand." Elena tried to pull away. "You can't just—" "I can. I am. And you have 2 choices." Shadowhawk's grip tightened. "Come willingly, and be treated with the dignity due a wife. Resist, and I'll drag you behind my horse for 20 miles. Either way, you're coming with me." Elena looked at the burning wagons, the circling buzzards already descending on the dead. She had no weapons, no water, no hope of survival alone in the desert. So she climbed onto the horse. And as they rode toward the mountains, Elena made a silent vow. She would survive this. She would find a way to escape. And she would make every single person responsible for this nightmare pay. She just didn't know yet that the truth was so much worse than she imagined. The Apache camp appeared as the sun hit its peak. A collection of wiki-ups hidden in a canyon so well concealed Elena would have ridden past it without noticing. 50, maybe 60 people stopped their work to stare as Shadowhawk rode in with his captive. The reactions varied. Some faces showed triumph. Others, concern. A few looked openly hostile. An elderly man emerged from the largest wiki-up, his face weathered like ancient stone, eagle feathers woven into his gray hair. Shadowhawk dismounted and spoke to him rapidly in Apache, too fast for Elena to catch even fragments. The old man's eyes settled on her with an expression she couldn't read. Finally, he spoke in accented but clear English. "I am White Thunder, leader of this band. My grandson tells me you are the bride of the soldier chief's nephew." "I was engaged to Marcus Brennan," Elena confirmed, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I've never met him. It was an arrangement made by my father for business reasons." Something shifted in White Thunder's expression. "Yet, you would have married him anyway." "I had no choice," Elena said bitterly. "My mother died when I was 12. My father needed military contracts to keep his trading business alive. Marcus Brennan was the price." White Thunder and Shadowhawk exchanged a long look. Finally, the elder nodded slowly. "Then you understand what it means to be traded like goods. Perhaps this makes you useful for more than we planned." He turned to the gathered crowd and made an announcement in Apache. The reactions were immediate and divided. Arguments erupted. A woman who looked about 30 stormed forward, her face twisted with rage, and unleashed a torrent of angry words at Shadowhawk. He stood rigid, taking the verbal assault without flinching. "That's Falling Star," said a voice beside Elena, a young woman, maybe 16, with intelligent eyes. "Shadowhawk's sister. She's furious because she thinks you'll bring soldiers down on us." "Who are you?" Elena asked. "Quiet Rain. I speak English because missionaries tried to save me when I was small." The girl's tone made clear what she thought of that. "I'm supposed to watch you. Make sure you don't try anything stupid." "I wouldn't know where to run," Elena admitted. "No," Quiet Rain agreed, studying her carefully. "But that's not why you haven't tried yet, is it? You're planning something. I can see it in your eyes." Elena met the girl's gaze steadily. "Wouldn't you?" For a moment, something like respect flickered across Quiet Rain's face. "Maybe I would. But you should know. Shadowhawk isn't like the other warriors. He spent 3 years at the Indian school in Santa Fe. They tried to make him white. Instead, they made him dangerous in ways they never expected." "What do you mean?" "He learned their language, their laws, their strategies. He learned how they think. And now he uses all of it against them." Quiet Rain's expression hardened. 5 months ago, soldiers attacked our summer camp while the men were hunting. They killed 11 women and children. Shadowhawk's wife and infant son were among them." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She looked at Shadowhawk, who stood arguing with his sister, his face carved from stone. "He didn't want this marriage either," Quiet Rain continued quietly. "But he'll do anything, sacrifice anything, to protect what's left of our people, even his own dignity." That night, Elena was given a wickiup at the edge of the camp. Small, isolated, but surprisingly comfortable. Quiet Rain brought food, roasted meat, corn cakes, water, and showed her where the necessary facilities were located. "The ceremony happens tomorrow," Quiet Rain said. "White Thunder wants it done quickly before word reaches the fort." "What kind of ceremony?" Elena asked. "The kind that makes you Shadowhawk's wife by our laws." Quiet Rain's expression was unreadable. "After that, you'll be expected to act like one, at least when others can see." "And when they can't see?" Quiet Rain shrugged. "That's between you and him. But I'll tell you this. He won't force himself on you. That's not our way. And it's especially not his way. Not after." She trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging heavy, "after his first wife was murdered by soldiers." Elena lay awake that night, staring at shadows dancing across the wickiup walls. Tomorrow, she would marry a man who'd orchestrated the massacre of her entire caravan. A man who saw her as nothing more than a political tool. But that man had also lost everything. His wife, his child, his people's land. Elena had spent 20 years as a commodity. First her father's, then sold to a man she'd never met. Now she belonged to Shadowhawk, except she'd never belonged to anyone. And maybe it was time everyone learned that. The ceremony took place at dawn, witnessed by the entire band. Elena wore doeskin that Falling Star had grudgingly provided. though the woman's hostile glare made clear this kindness was for tribal custom, not personal consideration. Shadowhawk stood beside her in traditional dress, his face revealing nothing as White Thunder performed the ritual. Words in Apache that Elena didn't understand, symbolic offerings of food and weapons, a ceremonial joining of their hands. The whole thing took maybe 10 minutes. Afterward, White Thunder addressed the assembled people. Quiet Rain translated in whispers. He says Shadowhawk has taken a white woman as wife to show the soldiers that we are not afraid of them, that we can turn their own weapons against them, that Elena Cortez is now Elena Shadowhawk, under the protection of our laws. Elena felt the weight of those words. Protection implied both safety and ownership. As the crowd dispersed, Shadowhawk finally spoke to her directly. You'll share my wiki-up. We must appear united or this entire plan falls apart. Your plan, Elena corrected coldly. I'm just the hostage. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. You're alive. That makes you luckier than the people in your caravan. The brutality of the statement stole her breath. You killed them. I did what was necessary to survive. Shadowhawk leaned closer, his voice dropping to something almost like a whisper. And so will you. Because the moment you became my wife, you became Apache. If the soldiers come for you, they'll have to come through all of us. And I promise you, Elena, I will not let another woman under my protection die to American bullets. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Elena standing alone in the morning sun, trying to process what had just happened. She'd expected a monster. Instead, she'd found something far more complicated. Over the following days, Elena learned the rhythm of camp life. The women taught her, with varying degrees of patience, how to prepare food, tan hides, and gather medicinal plants. Some treated her with cautious curiosity. Others, like Falling Star, made no effort to hide their contempt. Shadowhawk maintained careful distance. They shared the wiki-up, but slept on opposite sides. He spoke to her only when necessary, usually to explain some aspect of tribal life, or answer practical questions. But Elena noticed things. How he always ensured she had enough food, even when supplies ran short. How he positioned himself between her and anyone who might cause trouble. How his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. Not with desire, but with something more complicated. Assessment maybe. Or confusion. 2 weeks after the ceremony, a hunting party returned with troubling news. Soldiers from Fort Verde had been spotted near the canyon entrance, searching for something. Searching for her. That night, White Thunder called a council meeting. Elena wasn't invited, but Quiet Rain crept close enough to listen and reported back. They're arguing about what to do, the girl whispered. Shadowhawk wants to send a message to Colonel Brennan, demanding he withdraw his troops from our lands in exchange for your safe return. But others think we should kill you now before the soldiers find the camp. Elena's blood ran cold. And Shadowhawk? He said anyone who touches you will answer to him personally. Quiet Rain's eyes were wide. He challenged Falling Star when she suggested it. His own sister. Why? Elena breathed. Why would he protect me like that? Because you're his wife now. And Shadowhawk doesn't break his word, even when the word was given for strategy instead of love. The council meeting lasted hours. When Shadowhawk finally returned to the wiki-up, exhaustion lined his face. Elena sat up from her bedroll. What was decided? He looked at her for a long moment. Tomorrow, I ride to Fort Verde under truce flag. I'll deliver the terms to Colonel Brennan myself. That's suicide, Elena said flatly. They'll capture you the moment you arrive. Perhaps. Shadowhawk began removing his weapons, setting them carefully aside. But negotiations require risk, and I need Brennan to understand this isn't a bluff. Let me go with you. He turned sharply. Absolutely not. Think about it, Elena pressed, standing to face him. Brennan needs to see I'm alive and unharmed. More than that, he needs to see that I'm choosing to stay. That will devastate his nephew's pride more than anything. Marcus Brennan isn't just losing his bride to an Apache warrior. He's losing her willingly. Shadowhawk stared at her, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. You would do that? Humiliate your former fiancé to help my people? Marcus Brennan is a stranger who saw me as a trophy, Elena said coldly. You at least see me as a person. Even if that person is just a useful hostage. I'll take honest exploitation over romantic lies any day. A ghost of a smile touched Shadowhawk's lips. The first real emotion she'd seen from him in 2 weeks. You're not what I expected, he said quietly. Neither are you, Elena replied. The next morning, they rode out together under a white flag toward Fort Verde, heading into a confrontation that would change everything. Neither of them knew it yet, but Colonel Brennan had been playing his own game, and his rules were about to make Shadowhawk's plan look like child's play. Fort Verde loomed against the desert sky. Wooden walls, guard towers, American flags snapping in the hot wind. Soldiers lined the ramparts, rifles trained on the 2 riders approaching with their white truce flag held high. Elena sat rigid on the horse behind Shadowhawk, acutely aware of how many weapons were pointed at them. The gates opened. An officer rode out with 10 mounted soldiers, an escort that looked more like an execution squad. Shadowhawk, the officer called out. You've got some nerve showing your face here. I come under truce flag, Captain Morrison, Shadowhawk replied evenly. I have a message for Colonel Brennan. Morrison's eyes shifted to Elena. Recognition dawned, followed by confusion. Miss Cortez? We've been searching for you for 2 weeks. The colonel received word of the attack. Everyone was reported killed. Reports were wrong, Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. Then come with us now. We'll get you to safety. I'm exactly where I choose to be, Elena interrupted, the words tasting strange but powerful in her mouth. Shadowhawk is my husband by Apache law. I'm here to deliver terms. The soldiers erupted in angry mutters. Morrison looked genuinely shocked. You can't be serious. He's a savage who... He's a man protecting his people, Elena cut him off again. Which is more than I can say for the garrison that attacks women and children. Miss Cortez, you're clearly suffering from captivity trauma. I'm suffering from being used as a pawn my entire life, Elena snapped. First by my father, then by Marcus Brennan, now by Shadowhawk. At least Shadowhawk is honest about it. Shadowhawk's posture had gone very still. Elena couldn't see his face, but she felt the tension radiating from him. Morrison clearly didn't know how to respond. Finally, he gestured toward the fort. Colonel Brennan will want to hear this himself. They were escorted inside, still holding the truce flag, but surrounded by enough firepower to cut them down in seconds if things went wrong. The colonel's office was surprisingly civilized. Leather chairs, a polished desk, maps covering every wall. And behind that desk sat a man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that calculated everything. Colonel David Brennan stood as they entered. His gaze swept over Elena, cataloging her Apache clothing, her sun-darkened skin, the way she stood beside Shadowhawk rather than cowering behind him. Miss Cortez, he said, his voice revealing nothing. My nephew will be relieved to know you survived. Will he? Elena asked. Because from what I understand, Marcus saw our engagement as a business arrangement, just like my father did. Something shifted in Brennan's expression. Circumstances aside, you were under my family's protection. This warrior violated that by taking you. This warrior saved my life, Elena said. Everyone else in that caravan died. He kept me alive. As a hostage, Brennan countered. As a wife, Shadowhawk interjected quietly. By the laws of my people, Elena is Apache now. And I've come to negotiate the terms of our coexistence. You mean surrender, Brennan said flatly. I mean compromise. Shadowhawk moved forward, placing a folded document on the desk. These are the boundaries of our hunting grounds as defined by the Treaty of 1868. Your soldiers have built 3 outposts inside those boundaries in the last 4 months. You've violated the treaty repeatedly. Brennan glanced at the document without picking it up. Those territories are in dispute. They are not. The treaty is clear. Shadowhawk's voice remained level but forceful. Withdraw your soldiers from our lands, and I ensure safe passage for all legitimate traders through the valley. We can coexist peacefully. And Miss Cortez stays with me, as my wife, as she has chosen. Brennan's eyes moved to Elena. Is this true? You choose to stay with him? Elena met his gaze steadily. I do. What happened next shocked everyone. Brennan smiled. Not a friendly smile. A predator's smile. Well then, he said, settling back into his chair. This changes things considerably. Captain Morrison, please, bring in our guest. Morrison left, returning moments later with a man Elena had never seen but recognized instantly from descriptions. Marcus Brennan was 32, soft around the middle, with weak eyes and softer hands. He looked at Elena with a mixture of relief and disgust. Elena, thank God. We'll get you cleaned up, put you in proper clothing. I'm not going anywhere with you, Elena said coldly. Marcus's face reddened. Now see here. Enough, Colonel Brennan interrupted. He looked at Shadowhawk with something almost like respect. That was a good strategy. Take the bride, use her as leverage, force my hand. But you made one critical miscalculation. What's that? Shadowhawk asked, though Elena heard the wariness entering his voice. You assumed I wanted her back. The statement dropped like a stone into still water. Marcus looked confused. Shadowhawk's eyes narrowed dangerously, and Elena felt the bottom drop out of her world. What are you saying? She breathed. Brennan stood, walking to the window overlooking the parade ground. My nephew's engagement to you was indeed a business arrangement. Your father needed military protection for his trading routes. I needed, well, let's call it a convenient connection to certain supply networks your father controlled. But the caravan attack was unfortunate, Brennan continued as if she hadn't spoken, but ultimately solved several problems. Your father's debts to me disappeared with his death. The engagement dissolved. And now, thanks to you, I have the perfect justification for what comes next. Shadowhawk's hand moved toward his knife. A dozen rifles immediately cocked. Don't, Brennan said pleasantly. Hear me out. Elena Cortez was engaged to my nephew, a respected officer's son. She was taken by Apache raiders, and now, according to her own words in front of witnesses, she's declared herself Apache. Married to one of our most troublesome warriors. Understanding crashed over Elena like freezing water. You wanted this, she whispered. I needed this, Brennan corrected. Every attempt to clear Apache from these territories has been hampered by treaty obligations and political pressure from Washington. But an Apache attack on a civilian caravan? A white woman forced into marriage? That changes the narrative completely. She wasn't forced, Shadowhawk ground out. That's not what my report will say. Brennan's smile widened. And it's not what the newspapers across the territory will print. By next week, you'll be the savage who abducted and violated a defenseless white woman, a woman my nephew was trying to protect. Marcus Brennan suddenly looked a lot less confused. Father, this is brilliant. This is murder, Elena said, her voice shaking with fury. You're manufacturing justification for removing a persistent obstacle to progress, Brennan finished. The Apache have valuable land, mineral rights, water access, and they're in the way. Your tragic story gives me everything I need to move against them without political consequences. Shadowhawk's entire body had gone rigid with controlled rage. You would slaughter my people over lies. I would end a military conflict using the most efficient tools available. Brennan returned to his desk. Captain Morrison, escort these two to separate quarters. Miss Cortez will remain here under protective custody. Shadowhawk returns to his people with a message. They have 1 week to relocate to the reservation at San Carlos. After that, any Apache found within 50 miles of this fort will be treated as hostile combatants. You're violating the Treaty of 1868. The treaty died the moment you took an American citizen as a war captive, Brennan interrupted. Everything that happens next is your fault, Shadowhawk, and you'll live with that knowledge until we hunt you down. Soldiers moved forward to separate them. Shadowhawk locked eyes with Elena, and in that moment, she saw something crack in his carefully controlled facade. Not anger, something worse. Guilt. Because Brennan was right. Shadowhawk's plan had played directly into the colonel's hands. The marriage that was supposed to protect his people had instead given Brennan the weapon he needed to destroy them. "Wait," Elena said desperately, as soldiers grabbed her arms. "There has to be—" "There's nothing," Brennan said flatly. "The moment you declared yourself Apache, you lost any value to me as anything but propaganda. You're dismissed, Miss Cortez." As they dragged her from the office, Elena caught one last glimpse of Shadowhawk's face, and she saw a man who'd just realized he'd destroyed everything he was trying to save. The protective custody turned out to be a locked room in the officers' quarters, guarded day and night. Elena spent 3 days there, seeing no one but a silent private who brought food twice daily. On the 4th day, Marcus Brennan visited. "I wanted to see how you're recovering," he said, though his tone suggested he couldn't care less. Elena didn't bother responding. Marcus walked around the small room, examining it like he was appraising property. "My father explained the situation. You understand why we can't let you leave, of course. The story requires you to remain traumatized and under our protection." "The lie requires it, you mean?" "Semantics." Marcus waved a dismissive hand. "Once the Apache situation is resolved, we'll find somewhere for you. A convent, perhaps. Somewhere quiet where your experience won't be too scandalous." "I'm not the one who should be scandalized," Elena said coldly. Marcus's expression hardened. "You chose to marry a savage. You declared yourself one of them. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? I thought honor meant something. Honor is a luxury for people who can afford it." Marcus moved toward the door. "The campaign begins tomorrow. 3 companies of cavalry, plus militia volunteers. They'll clear the canyon by week's end." Elena surged to her feet. "There are children in that camp." "There are obstacles to territorial expansion," Marcus interrupted. "My father will do what's necessary, and history will remember him as the man who brought civilization to Arizona." After he left, Elena sat on the narrow bed, her mind racing. Shadowhawk's people had 1 week, but that deadline was a lie. Brennan was moving tomorrow. The Apache wouldn't have time to reach San Carlos even if they tried. This wasn't military strategy. This was genocide, and Elena was the excuse that made it possible. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she studied every inch of her prison. The window was small but not impossible. The guard changed shifts at midnight. The fort's stable was visible from her window, less than 50 yards away. Escaping wouldn't be easy. But neither was living with the knowledge that she'd helped murder an entire band of Apache. As midnight approached, Elena tore strips from her blanket, braiding them into rope. She'd watched her father secure cargo for 20 years. She knew knots. When the guards changed, she moved. The window opened with a creak that sounded thunderous in the quiet night. Elena tied her makeshift rope to the bed frame, fed it through the window, and climbed out into darkness. Her feet hit ground. She stayed low, moving through shadows toward the stable. A horse whinnied softly. Elena found the stall, grabbed a bridle, and, "Going somewhere!" Elena spun to find Captain Morrison standing in the stable entrance, pistol drawn, but not aimed, her heart hammered. "You're going to stop me?" Morrison looked at her for a long moment. Finally, he holstered his weapon. "I fought in the Indian Wars for 6 years. I've seen what happens when civilians get caught in military campaigns." He moved past her, selected a horse from a different stall. "This one's faster. Take the North Trail. It's longer but less patrolled." Elena stared at him, unable to process this unexpected mercy. "Why?" she managed. "Because I've got daughters," Morrison said quietly. "And I'd want someone to help them if they were in your position." He handed her a canteen and a small pouch. "Water and dried meat. It's all I can spare. They'll court-martial you. Only if they catch me." Morrison's smile was grim. "I'll report you escaped after overpowering me. Knocked me unconscious. I'll have the bruise to prove it. I'm quite good at falling down stairs." Elena grasped his hand briefly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just ride fast." Morrison's expression turned serious. "The Colonel's forces move out at dawn. You've got maybe 6 hours head start. Make them count." Elena mounted the horse, kicked her heels, and rode into the desert night like death itself was chasing her. Because it was. The ride back to the canyon took 4 hours of desperate pushing. Elena's stolen horse was nearly spent when she finally reached the concealed entrance as gray dawn light crept across the sky. Sentries recognized her immediately, rushing her toward the camp. People emerged from wiki-ups, confusion and alarm spreading like wildfire. Shadowhawk appeared from White Thunder's dwelling, his face transforming from shock to something Elena couldn't quite identify when he saw her. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, striding forward. "How did you—" "Soldiers," Elena gasped, sliding off the exhausted horse. "3 companies, moving at dawn. It's not a week, it's today. Brennan lied about everything." The camp exploded into controlled chaos. Warriors grabbed weapons, women began packing essentials, children were gathered and prepared to move. White Thunder emerged, his ancient eyes assessing the situation instantly. "How long do we have?" 2 hours, maybe 3 if we're lucky. Elena looked at Shadowhawk. "I'm sorry. I tried to stop this. I tried to—" "You escaped from a guarded fort and rode through the night to warn us," Shadowhawk said quietly. "Why?" "Because I meant what I said. I'm your wife. That makes these people my people." Elena straightened despite her exhaustion. "And I won't let Brennan use me as an excuse to murder them." Something shifted in Shadowhawk's expression, the carefully maintained emotional distance finally cracking. But there was no time to examine it. "White Thunder," he said, turning to the elder. "We need to move everyone to the high caves. The soldiers can't reach them on horseback." "It will take hours to evacuate everyone," Falling Star interjected, her hostility toward Elena temporarily forgotten in the crisis. "The old ones, the children." "Then we buy them time," Shadowhawk said flatly. He looked at the assembled warriors, barely 30 able-bodied men. "We set up defensive positions at the canyon entrance, hold them as long as possible." "That's suicide," White Thunder said. "They'll have too many men." "It's survival," Shadowhawk corrected. "We fight, we die. We run without fighting, they chase us down, and we die. We make a stand here, maybe, we save most of our people." The decision was made in seconds. Warriors prepared for battle. Women and children began the evacuation toward hidden caves in the canyon's upper reaches. Shadowhawk turned to Elena. "You need to go with them, now." "No." "Elena, I can shoot," she said. "My father taught me, and I'm the reason Brennan is coming. I won't hide while people die because of my choices. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I married you." Elena met his eyes steadily. "You told me yourself. I'm Apache now. So let me be Apache." For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Then Shadowhawk nodded once, sharply. "Quiet Rain. Get her a rifle." The next hour was a blur of preparation. Elena found herself positioned behind rocks near the canyon entrance alongside Quiet Rain and 3 male warriors. Her hands shook as she checked the rifle's ammunition. "Scared?" Quiet Rain asked. "Terrified," Elena admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you alive." The girl chambered a round with practiced ease. "Just remember, aim for center mass. Don't try for headshots." The soldiers appeared as the sun broke over the eastern ridgeline. More than Elena had feared. Not 3 companies, closer to 5, plus armed civilians. 200 men, maybe more, against 30 defenders. Shadowhawk stood at the canyon's entrance, holding no weapon, his hands empty and raised. "You're offering to negotiate?" Morrison's voice called out. He rode at the front, though Colonel Brennan himself was notably absent. "I'm offering you one chance to turn around," Shadowhawk replied. "This canyon is our home. Our ancestors are buried here. We won't abandon it." "You don't have a choice," Morrison called back, though Elena heard reluctance in his voice. "Colonel's orders are clear." "Then the Colonel can deliver them himself," Shadowhawk said. "Where is he, Captain? Why does he send you to do his killing?" Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "He's coordinating the operation from the fort." "He's a coward," Shadowhawk said flatly. "He creates reasons for war but won't fight them himself. Ask yourself, Captain, Is this the kind of man you want to die for? Morrison didn't answer, but Elena saw his hand tighten on his reins. Last chance, Shadowhawk said. Leave now. No one needs to die today. Morrison looked back at his men, then forward at the canyon entrance. Elena could practically see the war raging behind his eyes. Then a shot rang out. Not from Morrison, from someone in the ranks behind him, a civilian volunteer probably, eager for glory or bounty. The bullet struck rock 3 feet from Shadowhawk's position, and all hell broke loose. The battle that followed was chaos incarnate. Rifle fire echoed off canyon walls like thunder. Smoke obscured everything. Men screamed and died on both sides. Elena fired when targets presented themselves, trying not to think about whether the shapes in her sights were human beings, with families, hopes, fears. Trying to focus only on survival. Beside her, Quiet Rain dropped a soldier attempting to flank their position. The girl's face was set in grim determination, no trace of the playful teenager Elena had come to know. Reloading, Elena called out, ducking behind cover. A bullet struck rock inches from her head, shards of stone cutting her cheek. She finished reloading with trembling hands, rose, and fired again. The defenders were vastly outnumbered but held the terrain advantage. The canyon entrance was narrow, a natural choke point, but it wouldn't hold forever. Shadowhawk moved like smoke between positions, coordinating the defense, appearing where he was needed most. Elena watched him drag a wounded warrior to safety, then return to the line without hesitation. "They're trying to flank left!" someone shouted. Shadowhawk signaled. 3 warriors broke position to intercept. The fighting continued for what felt like hours but was probably closer to 45 minutes. Then Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Gradually, the shooting stopped. Smoke drifted across the battlefield, revealing the terrible cost. At least 20 soldiers down, dead or wounded. But 7 Apache warriors were dead too, and more injured. Morrison rode forward alone, hands raised. "Shadowhawk, we need to talk." Shadowhawk emerged from cover cautiously. "Talk then." "This is wrong," Morrison said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Colonel Brennan manufactured this entire situation. Miss Cortez wasn't taken against her will. This isn't a rescue operation. It's an excuse for land seizure." Murmurs rippled through the soldier ranks. Some looked uncertain, others angry. "What are you suggesting, Captain?" Shadowhawk asked carefully. "I'm suggesting I was given illegal orders based on false pretenses," Morrison replied. "And I won't murder civilians to advance a colonel's career." "Morrison, you're relieved of command." A major pushed forward, red-faced with fury. "I'll have you court-martialed for insubordination." "Court-martial me then," Morrison interrupted. "But do it after you explain to Washington why we attacked a peaceful Apache camp based on fabricated evidence." The major faltered. Behind him, soldiers began lowering their weapons, uncertainty spreading like contagion. Elena stepped out from cover. "Captain Morrison is telling the truth. Colonel Brennan admitted the entire plan to me. He wanted the Apache removed and used my situation to justify it." "That's a lie," the major started. "It's not," said one of the civilian volunteers stepping forward. "I've known David Brennan for 15 years. This is exactly the kind of thing he'd do." Another voice joined, then another. The careful coalition Brennan had built on lies and manufactured outrage was fracturing in real time. Morrison turned to Shadowhawk. "We're pulling back. All of us. I'll send word to Fort Bliss and petition for a formal investigation into Colonel Brennan's conduct." "And if the investigation clears him?" Shadowhawk asked. "Then I'll resign my commission," Morrison said. "Because I didn't join the cavalry to murder families for mineral rights." The soldiers withdrew slowly, carrying their dead and wounded. Elena watched them go, hardly daring to believe it was over. Shadowhawk appeared beside her, blood on his shirt. Someone else's, Elena hoped. "You saved us," he said quietly. "We saved each other," Elena corrected. She looked at the canyon, at the bodies being carried away, at the people slowly emerging from hiding. But at what cost? The investigation took 3 months. Elena testified at Fort Bliss before a military tribunal, detailing Brennan's confession and his manufactured justification for the campaign. Captain Morrison corroborated every point. Other officers came forward with evidence of Brennan's pattern of manipulation and falsified reports. Colonel David Brennan was stripped of his rank and arrested. Marcus Brennan, implicated in his father's schemes, resigned his commission in disgrace. The Treaty of 1868 was reaffirmed. The Apache were granted formal recognition of their territorial boundaries. Not everything they'd lost, but more than they'd dared hope to keep. Through it all, Elena and Shadowhawk lived in a strange limbo, married by Apache law but separated by circumstance. She stayed at a boarding house in town during the investigation. He remained with his people, rebuilding after the battle. They saw each other only during official proceedings. Brief glances across courtrooms, no private conversations, until the day the tribunal issued its final judgment. Elena stood on the boarding house porch as dusk fell, watching the street empty as businesses closed for the night. She'd been offered passage back east. Distant relatives who'd agreed to take her in, help her rebuild a respectable life. She'd declined. Horse hooves on packed earth made her turn. Shadowhawk dismounted, approaching slowly. "It's over," he said. "The tribunal upheld the treaty. My people are safe. For now." "I heard," Elena replied. They stood in silence, an impossible chasm of unspoken words between them. "You're free," Shadowhawk finally said. "The marriage was never legal by American law. You can return to your life." "What life?" Elena asked softly. "My father is dead. My former fiancé's family is disgraced. I have no money, no prospects, no home." "You could go east, start over." "I could," Elena agreed. "Or I could stay." Shadowhawk's expression flickered, hope and fear warring. "Why would you stay?" "Because somewhere between forced marriage and desperate alliance, something real happened." Elena moved closer. "You kept your promise. You protected me even when it cost you everything. You saw me as a person, not property. I used you as a bargaining chip. And I used you as an escape from Marcus Brennan," Elena interrupted. "We both entered this marriage for the wrong reasons. But maybe we could stay for the right ones." Shadowhawk closed the remaining distance between them. His hands found hers, calloused and warm. "You would choose this? Truly choose it, without coercion?" "I would choose you," Elena said. "If you'll have me, not as a hostage, not as strategy, as your wife." The kiss was different from anything they'd shared before. No audience, no pretense. Just two people who'd survived impossible circumstances and found each other in the wreckage. When they finally parted, Shadowhawk rested his forehead against hers. "There is something I should tell you. My name, Shadowhawk. It's a warrior name. The name my mother gave me was Dakota. It means friend to all." "Dakota," Elena whispered, testing the weight of it. "It suits you better than Shadowhawk. Perhaps in time, I can live up to it again." He pulled back slightly, studying her face. "And you? What shall I call you? Elena Cortez? Elena Shadowhawk?" "Just Elena," she said. "I've been too many people's property. From now on, I'm only myself." They rode back to the canyon together as stars emerged overhead. The camp welcomed Elena differently now. Not as a captive or a political pawn, but as someone who'd proven herself in fire. Quiet Rain embraced her immediately. "I knew you'd come back. You're too stubborn to do anything else." Even Falling Star offered a grudging nod of respect. "You fought well. That counts for something." White Thunder blessed their renewed commitment with traditional ceremonies, this time celebrated rather than endured. Mourning Dove wept happy tears. The entire band gathered to witness what felt like a true wedding, one chosen freely by both parties. That night, in their wiki-up, Shadowhawk, Dakota, held Elena close and told her stories of his parents, his childhood. The man he'd been before tragedy and manipulation had turned him into something harder. Elena shared her own stories. The mother she'd lost too young. The father she'd loved despite his flaws. The dreams she'd once harbored before circumstance crushed them. We can dream new dreams, Dakota said softly. Build a life neither of us imagined. A life we choose, Elena agreed. The following months were not easy. Adjusting to Apache life fully, not as a captive learning survival skills, but as a genuine member of the community, required Elena to shed old assumptions and embrace new ways of thinking. She learned to speak Apachean fluently, mastered skills that once seemed impossible, found unexpected friendships with women who'd initially viewed her with suspicion. Dakota, for his part, slowly let down the walls he'd built after losing his first family. He laughed more, told stories around the evening fire, let himself hope again. Their marriage evolved into something neither had expected, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared trauma, and the conscious choice to see each other as fully human despite everything trying to reduce them to symbols. 6 months after the tribunal, Elena discovered she was pregnant. The news brought mixed emotions. Joy, certainly, but also fear. The world was still dangerous, the treaty still fragile. Brennan might be disgraced, but plenty of other colonels harbored similar ambitions. Our child will know both worlds, Dakota said, his hand resting on Elena's still flat stomach. English and Apache. Christian prayers and sacred ceremonies. They'll bridge two peoples, just as we do. And if the world doesn't want them to exist? Elena asked quietly. Then we'll teach them to make the world change, Dakota replied. The way you changed me. The way I hope I've changed you. Elena thought about the terrified young woman who'd stepped off that wagon train 18 months ago. Powerless, traded like goods, certain her life was over. That woman no longer existed. In her place stood someone who'd chosen her own path, who'd fought for people not her own, who'd found love in the most impossible circumstances. You did change me, Elena said. You showed me I was stronger than I believed, braver than I thought, capable of choosing my own destiny. And you showed me, Dakota replied, pulling her close, that trust could be rebuilt, that love didn't have to mean loss, that sometimes the worst circumstances bring the greatest gifts. As winter gave way to spring, life in the canyon continued its ancient rhythms. Children played, elders told stories, warriors hunted, women tended homes and gardens, and Elena and Dakota built their life together, not the forced arrangement Brennan had orchestrated, not the strategic marriage Shadowhawk had planned, but something new, something chosen, something real. Their daughter was born in early summer, delivered with quiet rain and mourning dove attending. She came into the world screaming her defiance at the universe, tiny fists waving. She's got your fighting spirit, Dakota said, cradling the infant with surprising gentleness. And your stubborn streak, Elena replied, exhausted but radiant. They named her Ayana, which meant eternal bloom, a hope that something beautiful could survive and flourish even in harsh conditions. As Elena watched Dakota introduce their daughter to White Thunder, as she saw the elderly leader's eyes mist with joy, she realized something profound. This, all of this, had started with manipulation, coercion, and violence. But it had become something else entirely. A marriage that began as a prison had become a partnership. A hostage situation had evolved into a home. And two people thrown together by the worst of circumstances had found the best in each other. Not because they had to, because they chose to. And that choice, made freely, maintained consciously, honored daily, made all the difference. If this story of forced marriage transforming into chosen love moved you, if Elena's journey from captive to warrior resonated, or if Dakota's evolution from vengeful soldier to protective partner gave you hope, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment telling me, would you have returned to warn them? Could you have forgiven someone who orchestrated your family's death? What would you have chosen? Let me know below, and I'll see you in the next story where history's darkest moments reveal the human spirit's brightest truths.